Hello, my name is Demetrius Johnson, and this is another episode of Conversations with ACE. On this podcast, we talk with current and former students, faculty, staff, administrators, and other community members about things happening with them, to them, and around them. Today, I will be talking with UTSA Professor of Physics, Dr. Kelly Nash. We hope that you enjoy, and as always, like, subscribe, and comment. Dr. Kelly Nash. Dr. Nash, how are you doing today?
Doing well, thank you.
How was your brief Texas winter blizzard that occurred last week? How did you manage that?
I had to use all of my survival skills. I actually lived in Michigan for about 3.5 years when I was working on my master's degree in applied physics at University of Michigan. So it brought back memories as to why I got out of Michigan.
So, I was gonna say positive memories, negative memories.
Positive memories of seeing the beautiful snow. The first snow is always beautiful, and then it gets all melty and yucky. And of course, I never lost power in Michigan. So
that's good.
But
Did you lose power here?
I didn't lose power here, but lost water, and so had to use some of my great scientific skills to help my husband, who is not a scientist.
Okay.
We help us weather the storm. So.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, at least you didn't lose power. The water situation, I think that was difficult for a lot of people to have to endure. I certainly lost power for a couple of days, lost water for a couple of days. And so like my wife and I got to know each other a lot more than we probably have in the, short time that we've been married so far. Are you teaching classes this spring?
I am. I'm teaching one course, and it's called Classical Mechanics. It's an advanced undergraduate course. It's one of the first, I like to say, real physics classes outside of introductory physics. And so it's one of the first classes that physics majors take that put them in the mindset of being physicists. So.
Okay, so would this be a class that they would take after possibly having a course or two that's trying to decide if they're going to continue on this path, or like I've weeded you out and you might want to look into something else?
Yeah. Well, we don't like to weed students out. That's not our goal, but it is one of the gateway courses, and it's that sequence after students finish their calculus-based introductory physics courses. So they have 2 semesters of introductory calculus-based physics. They take typically a couple of math classes all the way through their calculus sequence, and then they're prepared to take there's a kind of 3-course sequence that are gateway courses, which are classical mechanics, modern physics, and mathematical physics. And so these are really courses that give students the strong foundation that they need to handle the more advanced physics as they go through their academic careers.
Okay. And then are you physically in a classroom, or is this virtual?
I'm teaching virtually, so my course this semester is a hybrid format, and so we're trying to do both offline content where students just kind of watch content, but also been fortunate. I have a few graduate students working with me this semester, and so when we do meet for our kind of scheduled meetings, we are doing kind of interactive simulations and really delving into what the classical mechanics entails.
Okay. And then I guess when there is a sense of normalcy that has returned, are you looking forward to being back in the classroom?
I am. I think there is truly a difference being in the classroom. That's hard to replicate in the online mode. But I do see some value even before, everything happened with the pandemic. I had started doing a bit of a hybrid mode with my course, and I was recording some material. And then when we showed up to class, we were actually working out problems, working in small groups. And, physics is one of those areas, like many areas, but physics where you have to learn to work collaboratively and work in groups. When we think about the best, and the greatest advances that we've made in science, it comes from collaborative work. And so I really think, classical mechanics and the course that I teach, these gateway courses, are where students learn that first, or get exposed for the first time to having to work collaboratively. So that's what I really miss about the classroom.
Okay. So with you having, I guess, already started doing a hybrid portion of your course, having to move online wasn't as big of a issue for you as it may have been for a few other faculty members.
Well, I won't say that. it's, I think it's been a challenge for everyone, right? Even if you've mastered online teaching, I think what we've learned and what we see coming out, in the literature and different news outlets, is that we have to be more engaging. And I think before the pandemic, online learning was, just watching lectures and just doing content and not really interacting with the faculty member as much. Maybe it was just this email communication. And, I think going forward, we're still going to have courses that are online and have these hybrid formats, but, folks are going to have to develop engaging content. And so I think that's why I've been able to take some of the material I've developed, but I'm developing a whole new tool set of materials to help students get a better grasp of the classical mechanics material.
Okay. Have you had any conversations with your undergrad students, your graduate students, about how they feel about online classes versus classes in the classroom, or being, amongst each other?
Yeah, I mean, again, I'm fortunate. I think I have a few graduate students working with me through a grant, a National Science Foundation grant that I'm participating on. And so those graduate students have been a great resource because they have been able to tell me what's working, what's not working, so that, it's not just this shock to the undergraduates where it's just massive content being delivered. And so, graduate students will tell you the truth often. And so I really appreciate that I at least have that opportunity and the National Science Foundation grant actually to test out some new techniques in this hybrid fashion. And so the general feedback, I think it's always, students, I'm sure it's not, it's never the in-person experience, but I think, being available for the students, being able to break out into small groups and have small conversations, that is helping us make do until we can get back to this in-person format.
What would you say is your favorite part about being a professor?
Uh, fundamentally, I'm a teacher, right? So, I think of the professoriate as, folks go into this because they have a passion for teaching and for helping students. And so, my favorite part of being a professor is having those opportunities to teach. Of course, I do research in my laboratory, and I view that as teaching as well because I have graduate students and undergraduates in my research lab. And so, teaching for centuries, right? You think about Socrates and Plato and all of these, great Greek philosophers, teaching was like a one-on-one experience. And so, I still get a little bit of that one-on-one teaching experience by working with students in my research lab. And then, balancing that against having to teach lecture classes, it's the most exciting part of the job.
Okay. So then I guess on the flip side, least favorite part about it?
I would say, I think the biggest challenge is, I don't know, it's, I think I always have that, trying to find that balance of managing my time with my other duties on the job, And so in particular, like you always want to make these perfect lectures, and, you have to realize that as a teacher that you're always learning and you're finding new ways to teach content, because not every student learns in the same way. And so I would say that's the most challenging part. I don't dislike it. It's just, it's the piece that takes up the most time, right?
Okay. And then, do you have a favorite story regarding a student or a group of students?
Uh, yeah, that's a good question. I've been teaching for almost 2 decades now. So, yeah, I would say, yeah, I actually had a good moment this year because, you never realize the impact that you have on students.
Mhm.
And I think I've taught actually on the K through 12 on high school level, as well as community college and university level. And I'm always just taken aback by things that students remember from a class. And I actually had a graduate student who took this same class quite a few years ago, probably almost 8 years ago, took this class that I'm teaching this semester. And he just remembered and recalled this aha moment that he had around gravitational motion, right? And how gravitation was related to harmonic motion. And so he really like re-inspired me this semester, because I hadn't realized, that it's those little things that sometimes students will have, everything will just click for them all of a sudden. And I do remember that student. He was struggling, and he was really, trying to grasp all of the content, was, at my office hours every week. And, it's just at that moment, he said it just clicked for him, and the rest of the semester made sense for him. And so that's always good to hear from students. And so that keeps me going and inspiring me to continue doing what I'm doing.
I will say that in that answer, you hit on several of the things that I'm about to ask you about.
Okay.
So, like you said, you've done K through 12, and so I was going to say, prior to beginning your career in higher education, you were a high school teacher. So,
Mhm.
how was that experience?
Uh, it was, I will say, the most challenging and most rewarding job. Even though I love academia and being at a university, that is really was a awesome experience, because you're really developing students when they're in their formative years, and they haven't, those students. I taught 10th, 11th, and 12th graders.
Okay.
It was in an urban, environment. It was in New Orleans, so an urban school. And so a lot of those students, either were first generation going to be going to college, or didn't even have aspirations of going to college. And when I think about, I have another memory of a student that I saw some years later after I had finished my PhD. And it turns out he was the kid that was always joking in class. I had to tell him to sit down and stay focused, and had to find those creative ways to engage him. And I taught mathematics actually, and so he and so it turns out like he ended up going into math education
Oh, wow.
and
Okay.
became a special ed student. I mean, special ed teacher. I'm sorry. And now I've kind of tracked his career. He's now like a vice principal or a principal at a school.
Wow.
So
Nice.
um, so you never know. That experience for me taught me a lot about where where to meet, how to meet students where they are academically, and also how to be supportive of their career aspirations, right? And so, I never approach any of my classes as, a fight of the fittest or whatever, right? It's this is, how can we help you reach your potential and reach, what are your career goals, right? What do you see yourself, doing in 10 years? I often ask students that. And it's not about whether physics, you're cut out for physics or not. It's about, where does this fit in your long-term ambitions and goals?
Would you say that each class over the years provides you new opportunities to approach teaching, but also like different challenges because of
Mhm.
whether it's generational or just
Mhm.
the, I guess, the demographics of your students?
Yeah. Um, yeah, I mean, I would say it's both of those, right? It's demographics, it's generational, it's, we're in the age of technology. I can think, I've been on faculty at UTSA for 10 years, and I can think 10 years ago, having students manipulate data and this whole idea of data science, it was established, but it wasn't as pervasive in, all branches of science and engineering. And so in recent years, I have really had to shift my focus of not only just teaching the fundamental theoretical aspects of physics, but also, how do you take that theoretical information and do a computational problem, right? Or apply it to a real world problem or computation where it's maybe data intensive or something that you can't solve with a piece of paper and a pencil, right? And so I think that's the challenge. That's one challenge, right? In terms of, evolving with technology. And we, of course, have more powerful computers than we did even 10 years ago.
Right.
So students can now do problems that I probably didn't do till I was a graduate student. They can do this now at an undergraduate level. And, I would say from a demographic standpoint, there's always this challenge, particularly in physics, that we faced of inclusivity. And so, having, women and underrepresented minorities in the classroom and attracting them, first of all, to physics. I think they are attracted to it. How many, kids do you see kids when they're young, they're fascinated by the stars and the moon, right? and the sun. And so, and all of this idea around astronomy draws a lot of people in. But then students reach this roadblock either in high school or even in their early years in college, where they feel that physics is not for them, right? There's not that representation. There isn't someone that looks like them. And we know when students see someone that looks like them in the classroom, they're more likely to succeed. And so I think that's one of the challenges that we're constantly facing in terms of getting more diverse students into the fold of physics. I hope that answered your question.
No, it
did.
No, it absolutely did.
Yeah.
Could you ever see yourself teaching high school students again, or are college students, more your calling?
I mean, I don't know if I can teach high school again. That was, I actually ended up in a high school classroom because I had finished my master's degree, but as an undergraduate, I had taken advantage of some programming at that time in the probably the late 90s. National Science Foundation, as well as Department of Education, had put this strategic investment and said, well, we need more science teachers, and how can we ease the pathway? We don't want these folks to have to go through a traditional education degree in order to get in the classroom. So I took a couple of classes as an undergraduate about pedagogy in the classroom for K through 12. And so that kind of prepared me for the classroom. I will say a lot of that, how we teach, has changed. So I would not be able to to drop into a classroom today. But I mean, I think it's great. I do work with, high school students. I mentor high school students in my lab, my research lab, through summer programs. So I've really, I've always, I think every summer since I've been a faculty member, I've had at least one high school student in my lab. And I think that's what I can balance right now, right? I don't know if I can see myself back in the classroom though.
You couldn't see yourself with, 20 to 25 high school students.
And look, I don't know how I survived teaching high school. I think one of my classes I remember had like 35 students in a high school classroom. And I just have this memory of one day the school had adopted a new textbook, and it was right at the beginning of the school year. And they sent the custodian staff around to come pick up all of the old textbooks. And I said, where are you all going with those textbooks? Like, mathematics hasn't changed in centuries. Like, we need this resource, because I was aware, or just keenly aware, that we only had one set of textbooks for the classroom. I had students in my class who could not take a textbook home, right? And so that to me was very eye-opening, because if you think about your first day you show up on a college campus, they're like, what is the first thing you do? You read the syllabus, you make sure you get your textbooks, right? You start reading the material according to the guidelines. And if in high school, if all your experience is that you have a textbook and the only time you use it is in the classroom,
Right.
that puts you at a disadvantage, right? So, and so for me, I like quickly grabbed those books and told those students, here, I know it's an older version of the textbook, but this is your book you're going to study from, and gain these, and learn these study skills that are going to help you further on, whether or not you go to college, it's going to help you. So, so I think a lot has changed, but a lot is still the same, I think, in K through 12. And I would say that was probably my biggest kind of frustration of being in K through 12 education, is having, equity and resources across all classrooms, right?
I will say that while math hasn't changed, how they teach math in K through 12 has changed. I have a niece who's a freshman in high school, and she'll call me and ask me to help her. Like, I can show you this old way that I learned, but I don't know if that's going to help you in your class when your teacher is telling you to do it this way. I can give you the answer. I can't get you the steps that they want you to get
that they want you to use. Yeah. I would say, yeah. So I for that reason, I know I have some nieces and nephews, and it's the same thing. And I'm like, okay, I know I'm a physicist and I have a PhD, but why are they teaching you this way? But I get it. You have to teach students multiple ways to look at a problem. And it's probably for the better, right? Because if they're going to tackle all of the tough problems that are going to be faced by the next generation, they need to be able to attack the problem from multiple ways. So I get it, but I just can't teach it. It's not my talent.
Right. Math is already not my strong suit. So her coming to me, that was like, I have a limited range, and that is outside of it. So I know that you got your start in higher education as an adjunct instructor at a community college in New Orleans. What led you to giving that a try? I know you did, high school. So what inspired you, or what led you to say, you know what, I want to try this higher education?
A little bit of motivation behind that was needing some money. I was a public school teacher, and I salaries were very minimal. But no, the opportunity presented itself. I used to tutor at that community college in their mathematics and physics lab, and the dean of the sciences at the community college found out, oh, we have somebody with a master's degree. I need someone to teach, and so I started teaching there, and I taught for about a year, and was truly like, just was amazed by being able to work in higher education. And I subsequently picked up another adjunct position at my own undergraduate institution, Dillard University. They offered me an opportunity to teach, and so it was great to work with college students who were just getting into physics and engineering, and I taught introductory physics at that point. But it was great to work with students, because these are students that are, they kind of know where their career path are, where they want to see themselves, I should say. in their career path. And they were just, it was great to work in a smaller group. You had like 20 students maximum in a class. And, that was some of my early experience of teaching physics with students who were just really excited about learning physics.
Are there any misconceptions about faculty members that undergraduates have that you would like to clear up?
That one of the major misconception, I think, is that your professor wants you to know all of the answers before you come to office hours. I think professors, we love to talk to students. That's been my experience. And I have to tell students from day one, that's what office hours are for. That's what those interactions, even if it's by email or, when we're in person or now virtually, you can gain a lot of insight. That's your opportunity to pick the brain of your professor. And it's an opportunity for you to, you shouldn't only view it as you're coming to your professor just to gain some knowledge. Your professor is gaining knowledge from you as well, because we're learning, maybe we didn't teach that concept just right. And it's helping us rethink how we present our material in the classroom. I think it's, it's a two-way street whenever you talk to your faculty members. So, don't be afraid. Don't have this misconception that, your faculty member doesn't want to talk to you. We're teachers at the end of the day, right? So that's one of our primary missions in our different faculty roles. So that would be one. Yeah.
So then why shouldn't students be afraid to come to their professors for help?
I would say, why shouldn't they be afraid? We're people too, right? So, I think it is intimidating, right? That somebody may have a PhD or, they have, at least a degree and you don't have a degree. And so students sometimes have this perception, that there is this, power structure that really isn't there, right? There's also this mindset that students may have that your faculty member is going to judge you, right, based on you not knowing something and you asking that stupid question, right? I always say no question is stupid, right? We all have heard this before. So, lots of people say that no question is stupid because you have that question. I guarantee you someone else in the classroom has that question. And so, don't be afraid to seek out that help. And I often find, will ask students like, that's a great question. Do you mind if I share that with the rest of the class? Because I'm sure someone else has that same question. So I think, it's really, your faculty members here to support you. We want to see everyone succeed. It's not our intention to fail anyone in a class. We just want to help support you to help you, meet the expectations that, we have in terms of an academic institution, which is, learning that material, applying it, and using it to further your academic career.
So I want to switch gears just a little bit. When I reached out to you to participate on this podcast, I let you know from the beginning that I didn't know much, if anything, about physics. I did do a quick Google search to see what the definition of physics was. And so Khan Academy defined physics as the study of matter, motion, energy, and force. And then James Clerk Maxwell, in his Matter and Motion book, published back in 1878, stated that physics is the study of matter, its motion and behavior through space and time, and the related entities of energy and force. Would you be able to break that definition down to a lay person like myself?
Okay, I always tell my students, physics is the study of everything. It is it's the world around us, right? So everything from the subatomic particles that we can't see, through the technology that we are using today for this conversation, is physics governs everything that we encounter in our everyday lives. And so the thing I love about physics is, even as a child, as you grow up, you experience and have some intuition about the physical behavior of objects, right? And so so that's what makes physics so exciting. But I would say it's the study of everything, right? And so all of the big, you know, cosmos and galaxies, all the way down to subatomic particles, there's lots of interesting fundamental physics that has great applications that have led us to the technology that we have in the world today.
I mentioned to you before we, came on, that I looked at your LinkedIn, and it says that you are skilled in nanomaterial physics, spectroscopy, fluorescence, and laser physics. What does that all mean?
So, you know, for me, and what I do for research in my lab is my students study materials, and those materials could be at the nanoscale, you know, which is 10 to the minus 9 meters. So this is very tiny, and all the way up through kind of like bulk materials. The reason we study these materials, and we use a lot of techniques like spectroscopy, and so spectroscopy is in there because what we do is shoot lasers at the material, and those materials have unique fingerprints, and so we can study unique fingerprints of those materials and understand their properties towards a particular application. So I'll give an example of some of the nanomaterials we've used in my lab. When we shine laser light on them, they will absorb that laser light and then re-emit or give off light at a different wavelength. And so those wavelengths of light that those nanomaterials give off, we've used that, for example, for stimulating neurons, right? And so, or, you know, ideas around tissue regeneration. So if we can control that light at the nanoscale, the minute scale, which is the size, you know, at the scale of molecules, then and cells, then we can actually control the behavior of human cells. So we're making little Terminators sometimes in the laboratory. No, not Terminators. I promise you, we're not making Terminators. But you know, we are trying to unlock some of the behavior that nature has figured out. Some of the biophysical nature of systems that nature has already figured out, and we're just trying to control it in a man-made way.
Then I guess I want to know, or how does that research or research on various materials benefit everyone and everything?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you can, you know, particularly nanomaterials, and so nanomaterials is about, you know, maybe a couple of decades old, and so it's becoming a mature technology. And there's a variety of nanomaterials. And, you know, I can even point to something like the COVID-19 vaccine. You know, 20 years ago, you know, people were starting to look at how do you encapsulate proteins and drugs and biomolecules with this idea of drug delivery. And you can look at the ingredients of the Moderna or the Pfizer vaccine, and they have something like polyethylene glycol, they have some lipids. You know, these are all biocompatible polymers that, you know, these companies have basically formulated into little capsules, probably like micro capsules, that help to stabilize the proteins. Or the RNA in this case that's being delivered in the vaccine. So, you know, nanotechnology is important, has become one of the cornerstone technologies in terms of our, you know, drug delivery applications. You can think about your devices that you have, like your cell phone. You know, you can think about, you know, energy applications. It's pervasive, right? And so we've been able to, you know, across the world, right, collectively, scientists have been able to develop all types of nanomaterials that have huge impact on all of the technology that we engage with every day.
So if I were a high school senior looking at going to a university, and I'm thinking of a major, and I'm like, you know what? I think I'll do physics.
Mhm.
What are some of the career opportunities outside of being a professor that they might be able to get into?
Okay. I think that's a great question. Physics is an area that encompasses so many subfields. So, you have a great opportunity if you major in physics. You can go into any type of engineering. Physics has become so data heavy that you can venture off into data science fields. I've seen students go into financial, you know, like financial markets and financial sectors. You can of course be a teacher. But yeah, I mean, you can look at a lot of companies are hiring physicists, and I'll plug also like the FBI, lots of federal agencies and national labs, which are very good paying jobs, even with a bachelor's degree in physics, hire folks. And the reason is because you have great, what we call analytical skills when you are a physicist. You know how to do problem solving. You learn that working collaboratively skill as an undergraduate, and this you have the math skills, right? The math and data skills, and often computer skills come with that. So it's a great career to go into. Even if you don't get that PhD, there's lots of opportunities outside of just doing pure academic research in physics.
Okay. And I know that earlier in our conversation, you talked about physics and astronomy. So would someone interested in physics, or that, gets a bachelor's, master's, or PhD in physics, would they be able to go work for, a NASA or a SpaceX, or,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, I think there's, you know, um, we just saw the wonderful, landing of Perseverance rover on
right,
Mars.
Mars?
Yeah, I can guarantee you those aren't just engineers. There's physicists, there's lots of data science people that are engaged. We're engaged in that project. So, yeah, definitely opportunities with NASA, SpaceX, all of these different space agencies. I know Virgin is getting into the space game. So I think, going forward, there's going to be so many job opportunities for physicists beyond just that pure academic route that, definitely NASA is going to need more, more rocket scientists.
Is there a difference between, I guess, just physics and applied physics? I think your master's is in applied physics, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, applied physics is one of these branches of physics that, spans, physics to engineering.
Okay.
And so I have a master's in applied physics. For me, what that means, I do kind of view myself as an applied physicist because I work collaboratively a lot of times with folks who are engineers or folks that are in the medical fields, because we're also thinking about not only the fundamental physics of the materials we're studying, but also the application side. And so we don't want to do it all in-house in my lab. We can't. So we often work with people that are in the medical field or engineers or biologists to actually test some of our materials and our theories. And so doing the applied physics is basically just it's akin to engineering, without I would say, the constraints of being an engineer.
Okay.
So and I always tell students, you can be a physicist and go be an engineer. It's very difficult to be an engineer and go back and be a physicist.
Okay.
Right? Because physics is engineering is based off of all of the fundamentals of physics. And if you know all of the fundamental physical properties and you study the broad range of those, then you could walk into an engineering program and say, and master it, right? Because you have that good foundation.
So are engineers the rectangles to squares and physicists the squares to rectangles?
I wouldn't say they're, I wouldn't go that far. And nothing, I have great engineering colleagues because I collaborate with lots of engineers. I would just say the two complement each other, right? And so, you need those great physics advances, those very fundamental advances, so that engineers can kind of pick up on those fundamental aspects and then work on the application. So I think they highly complement each other. I wouldn't say that they're so different as, kind of the rectangles and triangles and squares as you described.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
What has been the most interesting part of your research?
What has been the most interesting part? I think some of the materials that we've been looking at lately have been very interesting. So we've been developing some materials in the lab that have antimicrobial or anti-cancer properties, and some of these materials are found in nature, but we're making them in the lab into nanomaterials, and we've had some great results. Lots of publications and folks looking at our work at using these materials for antimicrobial coatings, for like biomedical applications. And then, some of the work we're doing with looking at, do these same materials inhibit cancer, could be, the next kind of exciting evolution of the materials that we're studying.
And so I know that you are the director of the Clayburgh Advanced Microscopy Center. Then I guess, could you explain what the center does?
Okay. Yeah, so the Clayburgh Advanced Microscopy Center is a multi-million-dollar center that's housed on campus that features some of the most advanced electron microscopes in the world. And electron microscopes are cool because you can look at very tiny things like nanomaterials. They basically use a beam of electrons to actually image materials. So you can think of the equivalent as that you use just light rays, or just light, you can think about sunlight or room light to actually image in a camera. And so you're able to see me because of the light that's bouncing off of my face and back into the camera. Well, if you do the same thing with electrons, then you can look at very, very tiny materials in the microscope. So we are fortunate to have the very first atomic resolution microscope that was ever installed in the US. It was at UTSA. She has a special name. Her name is Helenita, who she's named after Miss Helen Clayburgh. And so that's where the Clayburgh Microscopy Center gets its name. Outside of the microscopes, we have lots of other instruments, including X-ray diffraction instruments, as well as atomic force microscopes. So we have very advanced instruments. And the icing on the cake here is that students who are engaged in research can learn to train on these microscopes. And I would say that makes our center highly unique. There's lots of centers at other universities in the country, but very rarely do you have a full training program for both, not only graduate students and faculty and researchers, but also undergraduates have an opportunity to touch these advanced microscopes and learn and train on them. And so, so the center is run by Dr. Stavanovich, who came to us from Harvard University most recently. And she's doing an amazing job with building out a full training program for students to learn how to do very advanced materials characterization.
So is a center like that one of the things that a university would hope to put on its campus and push forward so that it's able to get those graduate students or those PhD candidates to want to, attend or possibly work for the university to help grow its profile in research and things like that.
Yeah, definitely. I would say most universities would dream of the center that we have. We actually have 6 electron microscopes, which is, a ton, right? In addition to the other materials characterization instruments that we have. And so, our center, with the number of microscopes we have, it rivals that at like Harvard University. You can think of all of the Big Ten universities, Arizona, University of Arizona has a huge center, so it is on par with a lot of R1 institutions across the country. And so, I would say that is a unique aspect and puts UTSA in a unique position to kind of be a leader in materials research. And I'll mention also that some of these same instruments that we have, some limited capabilities, but we can study biological materials. So we can basically freeze a whole, like a whole human cell, and actually put it in a microscope, and we can visualize cells. So there's lots of things that you can do with these microscopes, and it's unique to have at UTSA for its, the size institution that we have, and particularly because we're also Hispanic serving. Lots of minorities serving institutions don't have the type of facilities that we have.
I guess kind of shifting from that just a little bit, going back into research, how important is it that undergraduates get involved in research early?
I think extremely important. Even if you are not going to pursue an academic career, research teaches you some important skills that you'll need for your whatever career that you end up in. And so, if you, as early as you can get into a research lab, it's important. I know there's often limited funds and, for a faculty member to pay for you to be in their research lab. If you can afford it, if you can, afford to volunteer, students shouldn't be afraid to approach a faculty member about doing some research in a lab and volunteering on a shorthand basis. I think, the key thing that you learn is key things, I would say, are team building skills. You learn how to communicate, not only just communicate just to hold a conversation, but you learn how to communicate science and make it and make it relatable to people who are non-scientists. That's one of the challenges that we have as scientists. And I always see students who work in my lab, they seem to, as soon as they join the lab, their academics start to go through the roof. They start to do much better academically. A couple of reasons why. One, I think you're making connections to what you're actually learning in the classroom. So it just reinforces that and it brings it to life. And the other thing is, most likely if you're in that lab, I can't tell you how many times when we were in person, when I would walk into the lab and one of the graduate students is helping an undergraduate through a work, a homework problem. That's great. You have your faculty member as a resource, but you have, your lab mates that are there to help support you, and graduate students love to encourage the undergraduates. And so I would encourage students, again, whether or not you're going to go into academic or get a PhD, seek out research opportunities and don't just limit it to UTSA. There's REU programs where you can travel to other universities for the summer. Those are just great experiences.
As I was preparing for our conversation, I browsed through stats from the American Institute on Physics, on women in physics and astronomy, and the information that I found was a bit depressing, if you will, especially regarding some minority women. In physics and astronomy, both African American and Hispanic women remain underrepresented among degree recipients and academic department employees. However, the number of Hispanic women is growing rapidly over time, while the number of African American women has not grown. In 2016, 5% of women who earned physics doctorates were Hispanic and 3% were African American, and this is from the National Science Foundation in 2016. Is this something that you were aware of, and is it like kind of prevalent within the world of physics?
Yeah, I mean, the numbers, they really are startling. From that perspective, I think a lot of people aren't aware of how few underrepresented minority women are in physics. The number of Hispanic, women entering, this is just, because we see Hispanic enrollments going up across the country at all of our institutions. So naturally, this is what you would expect. I would say, from a physics perspective for African American women, people are trying to figure out what's the cause of, this kind of flattening. There was this, burst of and growth of African Americans in physics through the late 90s and early 2000s. I would argue that part of this was because of strategic investment from agencies like National Science Foundation, exposing students much earlier in the pipeline to STEM careers. And so we naturally saw African American women, entering into the pipeline of physics. But I also think it's a issue of physics, degree programs at some HBCUs, for example. We know some of our smaller HBCUs had to, they ended their physics degree programs, just because of the low enrollments. And also, African American students, some of them enter into STEM fields and they're at predominantly white institutions. And there's just this natural attrition rate where they're basically, just aren't making it through those academic programs in physics, right? So, I think the Hispanic population of women growing in physics and expanding that's going to be important for us in the next decade to see, how that trend goes. It's one of those things that it's hard to pinpoint, right? I think we can say in general for underrepresented minorities and women, the physics community hasn't been as inclusive. And so it's very hard to survive in a degree program when you're the only person in the classroom that looks like you, right? And I can recall, being a faculty member in the last 10 years, and even before that, when I was teaching at community college, I had many semesters where I didn't have any women or one woman in the classroom, right? And so that isolation takes a toll on the morale of students. And so, we do need to work on interventions to help to enhance that pipeline and maintain those students and retain students in physics. So, I think it's a multiple prong issue here as to, why these numbers remain flat and aren't growing.
Another interesting number that I found, kind of going off what you were talking about, the percentage of women earning physics doctorates and enrolling in doctoral programs has increased in recent years. In 2017, over 1,800 doctorates were awarded in physics, and 20% of these were earned by women. And then among first-year physics graduate students, 22% were women. So, and that's compared to 18% in 2007. So mind you, a 4% increase over 10 years may not sound like a lot, I guess, in the grand scheme of things, but to have, a bump at all, I guess it's certainly a plus.
Yeah, and I think if you just talk about just women in general, there have been great gains. I'll mention, I served formerly as the chair of the American Physical Society Conference for Undergraduate Women in Physics. These are nationwide conferences that are held at campuses across the US over a weekend period every January, where women get together. They talk about being a woman in physics. They provide a support group for each other, a support system for each other, and they network. Because again, you may be the only woman in your classroom at your home institution. And so that is important to building a sense of community. So I think we have done great in general with supporting women and putting programs in place. Where we're looking to see is the pipeline at the other end. And so one of those things that we are looking at is academia. And though we tell people like academia, everyone may not want to go into academia. Everyone, may not want to be a professor, and that's okay. But the women that end up in academia, are they being promoted? How many of them actually drop out of academia and go into industry? How many of them actually get promoted to being ultimately a full professor? Those numbers drop off drastically. So it's great. We're getting more women in the pipeline in terms of graduate school and getting graduate degrees. The next thing we want to see is, are they being, hired in faculty positions and being promoted? And that's important, because those women that are there in the undergraduate and entering college, if they don't see women professors, they fall into that kind of imposter syndrome and the stereotype that they don't see women, so physics must not be for them. And we want to, obviously counter that. I will say UTSA is, done a great job in physics. We have a number of women faculty in physics and above average. And so the likelihood of a female at UTSA having a female professor is I would think, I don't know the numbers exactly, but I'm sure it's higher than at most institutions.
And I would say that it's certainly important, even outside of physics, when students are deciding on majors and careers, and if they don't see individuals that look like them, you may have those few that are, I want to break that mold and hopefully set a precedent, or it's, this isn't for me, and because I don't see anybody like myself, so I want to go do things that I see others like myself.
Yeah, and I think that's the the key piece, right? You emulate what you see. And I'll mention one other thing. A few years ago, we had a group of our undergraduates that formed a women in physics group called the Rowdy Women in Physics. I don't know why they're rowdy, but they're rowdy because we love rowdy.
Right.
But no, but that was really great, right? A small group of women saying that we need to support each other. And the interesting thing is the group, I showed up to one of the last meetings before the pandemic and the shutdown of campus, and like over half of the women in the group were not physicists. they were students from other majors in the sciences. And so a good lesson, right, that just building a sense of community among women in science in general is one of the things that we could do as an institution, and folks can do on their campuses across the country to help be more of a support system, because that near peer support system is also a crucial piece.
So as a Black in STEM, do you hope that others see you as an example of them being able to do it as well?
Yeah, I mean, I hope they do. I've never, I always tell students, my journey into physics wasn't easy. It's not easy for most people, right? And so, that's why I also did back to what we talked about earlier about students being afraid to talk to their professors. Everybody struggles, right? So most likely your professor had the same struggles that you're encountering at some point. And so I think being Black in STEM has, and Black in physics in particular has, has been a struggle at times. But I have also just learned a lot about, persevering, you know, and being able to actually stand up for myself, and being able to be passionate and defend the science that I create every day, right? I'm not sure that, people who are non-Black in STEM or non-minorities in STEM have to encounter some of the same struggles, right? Um, but, I will say, this has mainly I have survived because I have a network of fellow people who are Black in STEM or Black in physics that have been a great support group. And so I have to give credit to them. They are my my foundation and have helped me to make it through this journey. And so I hope, that's one of the things I tell all of my students, but in particular when I, encounter Black students in STEM, I tell them you have to build your community. You can't be an island, and sometimes you have to kind of, force your way into, into the room, right? So that you can be seen, that you are heard, and that your opinion is valuable, because that diversity in the room is going to be important to advancing the science.
So I realized we have gotten this far in our conversation, and I never asked you what got you interested in physics.
Okay. I always credit, kind of three forces in my life. And, I would say I was that kid that was kind of interested in astronomy because my grandfather, who is 100 years old, is a Tuskegee Airman.
Oh, wow.
And also he was a microvirologist. And so I knew I didn't want to be a biologist, but, he would break out the telescopes and we would build telescopes over the summer. So I definitely got my bug in science from him early on, as a child. And then I would say the second force has definitely been my parents. I was an 80s kid, at that time you could go down to your local Radio Shack and take a computer science class. And, either my parents were trying to get rid of me, they needed to do something with me and my brother. And so they would send us to the Radio Shack, or to any kind of computer or STEM camp that they could find, just to expose us. And so, a lot of these were like free programs offered through the city and through the public school system at the time. And I think that was, obviously strategic investment from places like NSF and other foundations that afforded me those opportunities. And then I have to say the third force in my life was I was very fortunate to attend St. Mary's Academy in New Orleans. And it's an all girls, at that time, all girls Catholic school. It was a junior high school. Tuition was extremely cheap, but it was actually, St. Mary's Academy is run by the oldest order of African-American nuns in the country, the Sisters of the Holy Family. And when I think about those years, all of my math teachers and my science teachers, they were African-American women, and they were nuns too. But, seeing them and having calculus taught to me by African-American women, that I'm sure left some mark on me, that by the time I got to college and got to Dillard, and I was the only woman in my physics class, or the only one of a few women in my math classes, it really gave me the confidence that I could, do this, and conquer this major in physics. So, I would say those were the three major kind of moving forces as to why I ended up in physics. And I would say despite all of that, I did declare myself as a history major my very first semester in college, because I loved history too.
Okay.
But my mother quickly reminded me, what are you going to do with history? And I couldn't tell her. And so I just proceeded to go walk around to the different departments. And because I had calculus in high school, I had tested into calculus like 3. So I said, I'm a major in math And because this will get me out of college the fastest. That was my goal at that point. And so, my advisor was also a physicist. And so he was, he said, if you can do math, you can do physics. So Kelly, you're going to do both. And that's how I kind of ended up. But definitely, my grandfather, my parents, and I will say all of those wonderful nuns at St. Mary's got me to the point that prepared me to take on a career in physics.
Okay. I have a few more questions before we wrap up.
Okay.
So Dr. Nash is a graduate of Dillard University, the University of Michigan, and the University of Texas at San Antonio. Each institution is different than the other. One is a HBCU, or historically Black college or university. One is the PWI, or predominantly white institution, and the other is an HSI, or Hispanic serving institution. Can you talk about your experiences at each one? And then was it intentional that you went to 3 very different universities, or was it just like happenstance?
I hadn't really thought about this, but thank you for giving me this perspective. I have like the complete experience and have never thought about this before, but I will say each institution is unique. Dillard is a small, private, HBCU, liberal arts education. If anybody, has been to a HBCU and graduated from an HBCU, it's a family environment. They keep you very grounded. I think about all of my experiences. The first 2 years of my undergrad experience, you have to go to this class called convocation. And at the time, it was just like, why do I need to go to convocation every week? But now I realize, very famous African-American professionals from across the country and academics, they spoke at those convocations. And, that was really kind of inspirational and probably left a mark on me. Is to, you leave HBCU with the pride that you can conquer anything in this world. And so that was my experience there. And I think when I was there were about maybe 1,800 students, so very small.
Oh, right? Wow, okay.
And then, Michigan, that was, the big beast of an institution, right? But, I think at that time it was great. We had a lot of Black graduate students in engineering and the sciences. And so, I made a lot of friends and had a great support system. And, it was tough, not because of any academics. It was just kind of, a culture shock of growing up in the South and moving up north. But I think it was a great experience. I had a great research advisor, Dr. Donald Umstetter, who did amazing work, and he instilled in me a passion for lasers that I then carried on into my career, later career. So, leaving Michigan, I took a break. I tell students now, when you are burnt out, it's okay to take a break. And for me, I was really burnt out because I had, done my undergraduate in 4 years. Every summer, my advisor of my undergraduate career, I did a summer research experience for undergraduates program. So I was, just all over the place doing research, then jumping into a master's program. And so I was just really burnt out after 3 years. And so I took that break and then, I ended up at UTSA by happenstance. I was actually teaching as that adjunct faculty member at Dillard, and I saw a flyer for a brand new program in physics. And I was like, I think I'm ready to go back for my PhD, And so I had applied to a few other places and had gotten into all of the institutions I had applied to. But just really saw UTSA as a unique opportunity. And after speaking with Dr. Sardar, I think he was the chair of the admissions committee, and some work that he was doing with a group out of UC Davis, he thought, I would be a perfect fit for his group. And so I joined up and signed up. And, I will say UTSA back then was very small. There were maybe 18,000 students back when I joined the university. I remember the campus was dark at night, and I was like a graduate student working in the lab in the middle of the night, and it was pitch black. It's much more vibrant, obviously now. But I will say, UTSA, the students remind me a lot of my early years at Dillard, which is, one of the reasons I love being at UTSA. When I was at Dillard, a lot of first generation college students navigating the college experience. The friendships that you build, and it still feels like a small institution, even though we have over 30,000 students. I think that is, for me, the program when I joined was small. It was 10 of us in the very first class. Graduate students, and we quickly built a community. And I think, from that very first class, you can see, since I've been here at UTSA, that very first graduate class in physics, that every class there is just this sense of community among all of the students. If I compare that to Michigan, I don't remember that being the case, right? I remember being at Michigan, and it was very much, you're in your cohort, everybody kind of stuck together in their cohort. But then, you would go off into your research labs, and you really didn't interact with your fellow physics students. I think this has something to do with UTSA being an HSI, and, just the culture of the university, that it feels like a small, intimate university, but is, quite large in population.
Okay. Can we talk about what it has been like living in various parts of the country? You talked about growing up in New Orleans and then going up north to Ann Arbor, and they all have like very unique cultures about them. We're talking New Orleans, Ann Arbor, and then you lived in Sacramento for a bit when doing your fellowship, and now here in San Antonio. Do you have a favorite place that you've lived?
Yeah, I will say San Antonio is my favorite. It's the one that reminds me most of home, which, New Orleans is always going to be my home. But it's the one that reminds me the most of New Orleans, because there's, great culture, the people are friendly, you have great food, and so that makes it, a vibrant, place to live. And it has kind of that, unlike Houston and Dallas, you still kind of have that Southern feel a little bit, where things are a little bit slower pace.
Right.
And of course, New Orleans is notoriously slow. But I will say the same thing about Ann Arbor. Ann Arbor was great. It's super expensive to live in Ann Arbor, and Sacramento. I think they're both super expensive to live in. But great arts festivals and lots of interesting restaurants around Ann Arbor, which, things you want to do in your downtime outside of the grind of the job, right? But yeah, I love San Antonio. I think it is just a great place to live and to raise a family. And even if you're a young person, I know we have a lot of students that get attracted to UTSA from, even Houston and Dallas and other places across the country. I just think the opportunities are amazing in San Antonio, and getting young people to stay to help it grow even more is what's going to be exciting for the next few years in San Antonio.
Which area has the best food? I'm
Oh,
not biased already, but I want to know what you think.
that's a good question. I don't know, because San Antonio has like all of these like restaurants and small little spots. So I probably have a little, someplace I know on the east side, the west side, northwest. I always have one little space. But I do have my favorite restaurant is a Thai restaurant, not too far from the university on Days of Allah. So
Okay.
it has a special place in my heart, because they opened the day I graduated from UTSA. They opened up, and so they're still open. But I like to eat there. I love Thai food. So got nice flavor and spice. But, yeah.
And then I guess my last question, I know that you are a part of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated, and our vice president, Kamala Harris, is also a member as well. How exciting is that to have a fellow member be at, in the one of the highest positions in our federal government?
Yeah, I mean, it's, extremely exciting. Not, she's a sorority sister, but also, she's a HBCU grad. She's a HBCU grad. So that's, you also have that kind of bond there. And so I just think it's exciting. It is just, you know, uh, the sorority itself, Alpha Kappa Alpha and all of the Divine Nine Greek organizations, the African American Greek organizations, just have a storied history of, having propelled leaders, right, who were members of their organizations, and I can guarantee you all of those famous people that we know are part of Divine Nine organizations, they gain leadership skills and professional skills that they took out of those organizations and used to propel themselves to their heights in their careers. So it's just amazing. It's an amazing moment. It's obviously historical moment, but just super excited for for the sorority as a whole, and to see one of our members be elevated to that status.
Okay. Well, Dr. Nash, I certainly appreciate you accepting the offer to participate in our podcast. This has been very enlightening. I've learned a little bit more about physics. Still not enough to go back and get a degree in physics, but hopefully somebody else will be inspired because they have that inquisitive mind and they want to know more about materials and matters and things like that. Yes. So I certainly appreciate you taking the time out to talk with me.
I appreciate it, Demetrius. Thank you for having me, and this was amazing.